do it. And I'm also going to switch to all of this good stuff. You hold your breath when you do the whole technology thing, but I did a great deal of practicing, so I'm pretty sure I'm on my way with all of this. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for the supplier diversity and economic impact presentation. So in full disclosure, we had talked about doing this presentation in 2024 before the election. I had all sorts of exciting things that I thought I would be sharing. And needless to say, after the election, it certainly required me to take a reevaluation. While I think there still is a lot of optimism and exciting information that I can share during the course of this particular presentation, I think it's also important to know that there are some real headwinds that we're now facing. And I'll talk about those headwinds as we go forward. So I'd like to thank the folks at IDC, though, to allow me to do this presentation. We have about an hour allocated for us to do this presentation. We can do questions through the chat if you'd like, although kind of managing the slide deck, I might not get to them right away. I may leave a few minutes at the end in order to answer those questions that you may have. So as we put together this particular presentation, the emphasis was really around supplier diversity and to talk about the economic impact of it. And we all know that it has a relevant role in terms of how it drives business and growth in various communities and how they all develop. So we'll look at what the benefits are that we can explore today, and we can also give some insights around sourcing. But I wanted to spend as much time as I could to provide you an in-depth understanding of it all the way through. What does it look like in the future? Just as a bit of a personal disclaimer, I started my own consulting business about a year ago. It's GDC, or Greg DeShields Consulting, and the QR code is there if you'd like to take a look at it. We are an interesting group. We still provide assessments for organizations that are looking to improve their operational function, similar to what all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, doing assessments and gap analysis and action items, as well as strategic plans and implementation. We also created some customized work that is centered upon curriculum development. So organizations that hold conferences that have a student component, we build the academic curriculum for them. We're actually in a little project now that started in July and will take us all the way through November. So that's pretty exciting. And then we also launched a third window, which is our executive coaching session. It's really targeted to directors and new executive directors that really want to focus on some of the basic fundamentals that they need to know as they look forward to their professional development and building their career. So it's a great undertaking. It's something that, I put forth the effort of creating it on my own, but have some great people who are supporting me in it. And I think we can make a difference as we continue to navigate the world today. So here's our agenda. And once again, we have about an hour. I wanted to begin with focusing on what really is supplier diversity. So I did create a bit of a foundational understanding of the subject matter. And then I wanted to move into a discussion around the rationale of supplier diversity, how we ultimately measure it for economic impact. And I guess this is where we see the rubber hit the road in terms of whether or not this is worth it and it does what it needs to do. And then focus on some of the best practices for implementing it. And then towards the end, speaking more realistically, but still optimistically around the challenges that we're facing with supplier diversity. I did want to deviate for just one more moment. So last year, I went to work for an organization called Manufacturing Partnering Group. They are a supply chain intermediary. They do access through a large marketplace of activity in order to reduce bottlenecks as it relates to products and services globally. They had two offices, one in Houston and the other one was in Lagos, Nigeria. My role was an interesting one. I served as the global director for their club and events division. The type of products and services that they make available range across oil, gas, real estate, healthcare, but my area really focused on the work that they did around meeting and events. So in my capacity, I was hired to establish a, a procurement of activities through diverse suppliers. And that was everything from Black photographers to limousine companies to marketing firms to research firms to um, uh, we actually came across a private jet company that was owned by a Black couple. So the ability to build that database was really important. We took it from zero to about 950 diverse suppliers, which was fantastic for them. And they can use them. They're still very much in their database. But it was done with the intent that there was going to be a change of administration that would retain control by the Democrats. And after the election, I was on vacation in London, and they informed me that now that there was going to be a different set of priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that they eliminated the entire department and all of the initiatives. And we know many people who unfortunately have had reevaluation of diversity, equity, and inclusion affect them directly. But it was an amazing project. The organization is still very active. However, while those vendors are in their database, they are not necessarily specifically targeted for the reasons that would have been done during the course of supplier diversity. So I use that as a way of kind of building the discussion today. So understanding supplier diversity, I thought it would be great to kind of at least look at it through an evolution of how we got from and to. So essentially, the concept of supplier diversity grew out of the civil rights movement. So it dates back to the 1960s. And that was really at a time where we were looking at creating access and opportunities for minorities. And that was at the time the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was being developed. And that was really meant to prohibit any kind of discrimination that would take place. And believe it or not, it was Richard Nixon who, in 1969, actually signed the executive order that created the Office of Minority Business Enterprise. And that really promoted growth in a competitive environment for minority owned businesses. And then later in 1971, it gave growth to the National Minority Purchasing Council, which, as we now know, later became the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And throughout time, it continued to evolve. In the 1980s, more and more corporations began to see the value of it and ways of how they could integrate it in terms of a business strategy. And as we look at it today, even with the volatile environment that we live in, there still is a great deal of value and insight that's associated with organizations that opt to tie into supplier diversity. I also wanted to just give a shout out because there were some notable people, such as Ron Brown in the 1990s, and he was the Secretary of Commerce who was a strong advocate for diversity, supplier diversity as a real crucial tool around economic empowerment. And then Dr. Dorothy Brothers, who was with Bank of America, was one of the staunch corporate advocates about integrating it within the procurement aspect of corporate America. And then Alfred Liggins, who's with Urban One, which is the largest African American owned media. He really was a strong advocate for it, but put a big emphasis of work around supplier diversity in the media industry. There still is a lot of work that probably can be done in the media industry, but those are just some notable people that kind of allows us to see from and to. So these are the categories that are really identified as it relates to diverse suppliers. So minority-owned businesses, those are those that are owned by individuals from racial or ethnic minority groups that really promote inclusion and economic growth. Women-owned business, veteran-owned businesses, and then LGBTQ and disabled-owned businesses. And we'll get a little bit more deeper into it, but just as a fundamental understanding, those are really the categories. So we know that it was created back in the 1960s, and throughout the years, it continued to gather a great deal of support, especially from the acting administration. But I wanted to highlight these because these were the executive orders that were a part of the Biden administration when he stepped into office. So these specific executive orders really gave rise to the activity that we saw shortly after the death of George Floyd, and more organizations were embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. But these executive orders were being fueled by different offices within the federal government and different departments and divisions that had been created. So there was an internal culture that was also influencing the outside corporate market that focused on advancing racial equity and support of underserved communities, looking at ways of how they could create advancement, and tying it to the initiatives to increase the infrastructure of the United States, and also just being much more involved from a manufacturing perspective. So these specific executive orders, while brief in description, were also driving a lot of the governmental action that took place. So the concepts around supplier diversity are, are are put into some buckets that help us land on where different things are. So there is an effort when you are engaged in supplier diversity to be very proactive in sourcing. So you would want to use this as a way of sourcing more and more diverse owned businesses in order to be much more involved in the pipeline of business activity that you engage in to grow your business. The economic participation associated with it allows for us to see that there's equitable economic participation that is made available to diverse suppliers. So that economic participation can be specific percentage numbers. I worked with the Convention and Visitors Bureau in Philadelphia, and we were hosting a large convention, and the gentleman who led our Department of Commerce, he had a strong belief that we should be close to about 20 to 25% in the participation rate. What's probably more realistic that we see in organizations is that they're around 7 and 8%. And there is a growth potential that we'd like to see, but those specific percentages are guideposts for organizations to determine how well they are doing or how much more they have to do as they grow even better. And that, once again, is based upon how much participation that you can create. And then to support diverse suppliers, conceptually, we want to find a way to ensure that suppliers of all different types have a way to enhance their capability and also bring even that much more growth to their local communities. So these are some of the organizations that are typically the go-to source from both, they represent national organizations but have local affiliations. So from a supplier diversity perspective, if you are a minority-owned business and you want to get some form of insight or know who can be strong advocates or be a source for information, whether it's with the National Minority Supplier Development Group, the Women's Business Enterprise Council, veteran-owned business. You can see there's a long list of them, which serve as really good resources as a diverse business in order to make a connection so that you can be up to date in terms of business opportunities that can be created and also provide you access to opportunities. From a governmental perspective, these were kind of the go-to sources. And as we know, there has been a lot of success with them, but a lot of these organizations have been targeted as it relates to some of the initiatives that have been put forth under the current administration. But it is notable that the Small Business Administration had been a go-to, the Minority Business Development Agency. Actually, there was a gentleman that I worked with for years who's with the Minority Business Development Agency and brought a lot of resources for diverse businesses. And I was in Miami at a conference, and he shared that he had been laid off. He was like the go-to guy in order to create business opportunities for a minority business. So very disappointing. And of course, the General Services Administration. So I'll talk a lot deeper about what has been the ramifications of it, but fundamentally, these were all the pieces that were associated with how supplier diversity was facilitated. So that rationale that's associated with supplier diversity, I wanted to spend some time with it because, aside from all the top level thoughts that we would think that are good, there is some rationale behind it. So The idea of it is that it does help to build resilience for organizations. They're able to move beyond just one single source and create a variety of places as to where they can acquire products and services. And that was part of the work that I did with MPG in order to help to provide them a much more robust pool of suppliers that they could work with that would give them even greater advantage and in some cases better pricing. Work with those suppliers to open up the access to new markets as well as new customer base, and then to enhance brand reputation. So organizations that were participating in supplier diversity would certainly see that there would be a great opportunity to build on the reputation of who they are. And I'll talk about some of the organizations that have advanced and benefited from it. So it also is to help enhance innovation and competitiveness. So as a organization that would like to participate in it, it offers us a way to bring unique viewpoints and enhance creativity and drive innovation. And then also they get a bit of a competitive advantage. So I wanted to stop here for a minute because I have in front of me a variety of products and services, I think, that kind of underscores how for those organizations that participate in supplier diversity, they get access to things that will resonate with certain customers and perhaps open new markets and also create a new competitive environment. So I'm a big person who believes in my hair curl. So I can only get the kind of hair curls that I have with the S Curl product. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Lester's S Curl, but it has been like a staple for me forever. And if I were to stay in a hotel or if I went to a particular shop and they had that product, it makes a difference. I mean, I'm going there and I'm specifically looking for that product, and it's produced by an African American firm. So that's where the ability to enhance the offering of a particular company and attracting a different market will come into play. The other I have here is a can of Glory collard greens. Well, first off, you don't just eat anyone's collard greens, but if I am going to go outside of the ones that I make, Glory would be the go-to ones. And that's a brand that like you stick to. The name automatically drives you to say, okay, this makes sense. I'm happy here. And it builds the reputation of the vendor that they actually know that if I'm not going to do, you know, custom made collard greens, I'm going to use Glory because people will certainly respond. They almost should put a sign to say these are Glory greens. I'm also a big believer in terms of skincare products, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Nat Nola as a skin cream, but I was told about Nat Nola when I was young that it is for Black people, it is the fountain of youth, and you have to use it every day, which I use every day. And I just bring that to light because there are products and services that are very specific to communities that, when you think in terms of supplier diversity, you enhance your customer base, you build greater loyalty. It really enhances the reputation that you bring. One more actually I have two more products. So there's Palmer's Success Skin Cream. Like, you know, during the summer when you get a little too dark, this is a great way to help even your skin tone. And it's once again a product that has been a staple in the African American community. And Soft Tea, which is like a styling gel that you can use as well. All of those products have a way of resonating with a customer. And when you think of it in terms of supplier diversity, it is trying to reach customers, either to build a deeper, stronger relationship with them or to expand new customer markets. And it helps you to be competitive against other markets if you have that kind of plugin. So those are just a few examples of how the integration of specific products can make a difference. So measuring the economic impact of it is really key. This is where we should be able to say the rubber hits the road. So there is a direct economic impact of about $400 billion in revenue that flows from minority businesses. So we know that that money is out there. And how do we find a way to connect that to the aspects of what we are operating as a business? And that it is notable that there's approximately 30% of businesses in the US that are minority owned. So those are real important components to think of in terms of how you convert that into business opportunity or driving money to the bottom line. But I will also say that there is that indirect economic opportunity that comes out of it in terms of what it does in terms of the economic growth in those communities. Those businesses that you are able to bring into your organization to provide products and services have a direct contribution to the people who live in those communities where they're located. And it provides them jobs, it provides them the ability to build more economic wealth within the place that they live and they work. So there are some direct and indirect benefits that come out of that. This job creation component is also a real important piece because you really want that money that comes through by bringing on diverse suppliers to help to regenerate activity into the communities where they are located. There's a firm that I was speaking to when I was working on this particular slide, and they have launched a research project to look at the dollars that a business that is tied to a supplier diversity contract, how much of that money they spend back in their community, meaning there's a guy who sells coffee in front of their office. How much money do we spend with that particular vendor? So to see not just how it helps to create job growth and how it helps to create business for that diverse business, but how does that diverse business spend that money and create economic activity in the community that they live? So that's where the community development component of it is really important, because you can see that it's not just the benefit to the business, but the financial benefit to the community. So when diverse businesses thrive, those communities are able to prosper, and it really creates this positive cycle of economic empowerment. So some of the best practices around implementing a supplier diversity program, and so much of this right now is in shifting environment. So it should be clear policies and objectives. And this is where organizations now are being challenged in terms of, what are their core values and what is truly their mission and what do they believe in and what will they fight for? So senior executives have to be able to discriminate what they're to demonstrate their commitment, but also it has to flow from the top down. And the expectation should be very clear with measurable goals that they can stand behind. It should be something that can easily be defined in terms of criteria for the participation of businesses. And then those goals should be incorporated in a way that the process can support as many inclusive businesses as possible. The outreach to diverse suppliers is key, because in a number of cases, they may not necessarily be fully ready to plug into you. So there's things that you may have to do in order to connect with them. And there's ways that you want to assess their business to make sure their business is ready to be put on the center stage. And that means they've got to be ready for customers, and they have to be as technologically savvy with the expectations as customers as they would want. And then there's got to be continuity in terms of the quality of the product and service they have. So you want to build relationships with them, you want to provide training, and then you just want to facilitate access for them in order to make sure that they are strengthened as a business, knowledgeable as a business, in order to provide their product and service that will benefit the firm that they are working with and ultimately their customer. I did want to point out there are some tech tips as we look at this particular area. So there is Artestro, which provides supplier matching. It does analysis that will help ensure that a supplier can meet the needs of a particular firm. Aventa, it verifies that the supplier diversity status has collected all the necessary documents. So this integration of technology has become extremely helpful, especially when you're in a position where you need to be able to validate, justify, or in some way or another define the benefits associated with supplier diversity programs. The other thing that I will say is that generative artificial intelligence has really stepped into this as well. There are some concerns about how the coding of the artificial intelligence is developed to ensure that it's as inclusive as possible, but it does create to some degree a bit of a fairer or more competitive environment for smaller businesses to participate. So these are some of the technologies that have been used. Clearly, artificial intelligence will be introduced and create even more opportunities on both sides. So from a monitoring perspective and reporting, it's important to take into account that tracking is tied into it as a really intricate way of showing that you have made the connection, but most importantly, you are using metrics to identify any of the areas of need that you may have. You want to get as much feedback as you can in order to change and evolve the program, certainly as businesses grow into the community. And then always think about ways that you can adjust your program. Who are we leaving out? Who are we not really focused on? Some organizations may only start targeting one particular community within the diverse representation of communities that are represented under supplier diversity. And then they take that as a best practice and they adapt it as they go through and add more and more. So these are some of the ways that serve as best practice as you launch it and you really implement it. All right, so aside from that fundamental, I wanted to put into context some of the things that we are facing in today as it relates to the challenges. So I wanted to kind of start here and then kind of build from here. So under the current administration, there were executive orders that were signed in January of this year. The first that was 14173, which was an executive order to rescind the executive order 11246, which had prohibited discrimination in federal contracting based on that. So that goes all the way back to the 1960s. So that has been rescinded as a result of this particular executive order. The second executive order that was signed, that's 14151, this one mandates the termination of all DEI related activities within federal departments, and it led to the dissolving offices of DEI and removal of DEI related content from all federal websites and the termination of DEI related contracts. And I'll get even further deep into that, but I wanted to do a little bit of a level set so we know really what is the environment that we're in. And then the third that was signed really took the 68 executive orders and the memorandums that was signed by President Biden, which I referred to earlier, and it essentially eliminated those. So fundamentally, those are what has been driving the impact on supplier diversity, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I want to go a little bit deeper and put it into perspective. So the impact on federal supplier diversity is that it now means that there will be a shift in terms of policy as it relates to diversity. So the elimination of DEI consideration in procurement. So federal agencies are no longer required to consider the company's DEI practice when making procurement decisions. And the rescission of affirmative action mandates, the revocation of Executive Order 11246 relates to the directive that would have ended affirmative action requirements with contractors. So this move restores what we've heard over and over again, merit-based hiring practices and eliminating what is called discriminatory DEI programs. And I'll talk about that even more. And this, under the Office of Federal Contract and Compliance, will stop promoting diversity and holding federal contractors to stop promoting diversity and holding federal contractors accountable. So there are things that are going to happen to you if you continue to do this. And then, of course, they eliminated the DEI offices. So the relationship that the supplier diversity programs have had with the federal government are certainly challenged at this point. It doesn't mean that we can't continue to do business with the federal government. It just means that the way that we have been doing it in the past will certainly not be the environment we're in today. So the broader implications is that it represents a shift in the policies that we have. So we can't necessarily look for the same paths. It will, without any doubt, reduce opportunities for minority-owned businesses, and it will undermine all those efforts that we've seen and it will certainly make more inequities exist. Um, Businesses will certainly have to engage with the government in a different way. And as we think of it from a merit-based perspective, it'll make it more important that some of the fundamental things that would allow you to be competitive are built into your platform of what you would do, and that these policies, although they are at a federal level, will have some impact on state and corporate. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So this is an area that I had learned about recently, and I've wanted to kind of share with people, and I did want to bring it up as a part of this particular conversation because I think it's really powerful. So I'm not sure if you know that there is a term that's being used, illegal DEI, also the whistleblower program. So this is very important. So illegal DEI refers to DEI programs like supplier diversity that are considered discriminatory under the current federal anti-discrimination law, and that's the executive order for it. So federal contractors or grantees can't do it because it exposes you to a false claim act. And the False Claim Act can actually, well, let me just jump to that for a minute. Um, the False Claim Act is where someone can actually bring a lawsuit because they saw something that you did that says diversity or whatever the case may be. And that whistleblower program can be anybody. It could be a housekeeper, it could be a window washer, it could be a variety of different people who have absolutely no particular agenda other than to say we just don't like DEI. But it's important to know that there is now a term called illegal DEI that is supported through an executive order, which leads us to very vulnerable scenarios when it is reviewed by someone who may call themselves a whistleblower. And I wanted to go even one step further to talk about this ugly list. And it's ugly for a variety of reasons because it's so short, or because it's so small. But this is a list of words that we cannot use, especially if we're submitting a proposal or we're trying to do business with the federal government. These particular words have been banned or have flagged. So if you sent if you're responding to an RFP and you use some of these particular words, they usually will say that these words may draw them to connect you to the False Claim Act. It could be considered that you are promoting illegal DEI, and it just steamrolls from there. So monitoring this list, and this list is in March. In January, there was only like 150 words on this list. So I know that through IDC, we've talked about how, they keep moving the ball as it relates to DEI, but this list has really continued to evolve. And, some of the words are pretty jaw-dropping, that they have on here. And it almost, leaves you to say, what word could I possibly use? But it covers everything from DEI to sustainability to healthcare. So this is what we would want to be mindful of as it relates to the previous slide around illegal DEI, because they monitor and they ban things from this. So then that takes us into corporate. So if we move away from federal government, I did just want to talk a little bit about corporate, because these are the companies that actually have rolled back. And you can see from McDonald's to Meta to Target to Amazon to Lowe's, these are companies that have made significant reversal decisions in their DEI efforts. A number of it could be because although there's no law that directly relates to how corporate operates, they are susceptible to receiving funds from the federal government. If they're an operating business, they may be receiving some sort of tax credits or something that serves as a financial advantage to them as a business, and depending how big it is or how small it is, it certainly could address their bottom line if they are brought up on legal charges or if they are just no longer accessible for funds. It doesn't in any way validate it in terms of what that means into their loyal customers. I think a lot of people have heard a lot of the controversy around Target, because Target still would like to try and rebuild their relationship within a variety of communities by sponsoring some significant events across the country. But the efforts have caused organizations to take pause And to that degree, we see that in some cases, there are rollbacks, and these are the rollbacks that we see. I'm sorry. Um, so what does that mean? We still, in addition to those obstacles, have the regular obstacles that we've always dealt with when it comes to supplier diversity: limited supplier capacity, lack of awareness, and internal resistance. So while we are aware that there are cultural shifts in terms of how business is done with the government or outside from a corporate perspective, these have still been always concerns in terms of how we're able to successfully navigate and implement supplier diversity strategies. And to that degree, we would want to also keep our eye on the ball in terms of these things, because even if we get past some of the legislative issues, we still have some of the concerns associated with a lack of awareness or just how people become resistant. So when I did those last few slides, I was like, oh my God, it's about the most depressing slides I've ever done. I said, I have to find a way to end this with a little bit more optimism. So some of the strategies I think as we go forward is the idea that we should be mindful of how we can build mentorships that can come out of these relationships with diverse businesses, how we can simplify our procurement strategies, and think in terms of how we can create a more inclusive culture. So I did show you a bad list, but I did want to show you a good list. So these are companies that have decided, you know what, we're going to stick with it. We're going to put the pedal to the metal. Now, how they do it is very different. Some were very, open and broad in terms of promoting their efforts. But there are still organizations, like Intel. It was pretty amazing to see how they were able to achieve their goals, and they wanted to double down and push even more towards it. I know recently, because Comcast is here in Philadelphia, they were targeted by the administration because of a lot of the work that they've been doing. However, they've been able to maintain the work. They may not promote the work as we've seen it in the past, but you'll talk to a number of businesses that have said, you know what, we're just going to continue to do the work. We're not necessarily going to do the work in the same broadly announced way that we've done in the past, but that we continue to do it. And this is just a small snippet of it. It certainly isn't the list that we've seen in the past, but I did want to give a shout out to those organizations that still believe in it and still maintain it as a part of what they do. The other thing I did want to share with you is that I had talked about what has been decisions made on the federal side, but there are states that are also doing things to codify or to ensure that supplier diversity programs take place within their jurisdiction. And looking at it here, New York, California, Colorado, Connecticut, and Delaware all have varying types of initiatives and programs that are underway. And for those who are looking to do business in those particular markets with the support of the supplier diversity program, there's a lot of opportunity that comes out of it when you have that kind of state support. And I just wanted to point it out. There are a couple of other states, New Jersey, my home state, they have some great efforts through the governor's office as well that really supports it. But I did just want to point out that even though we may not see it on a national, federal level, there are state levels that have initiatives that you can do business with as well. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there are national chambers of commerce, and those chambers of commerce are really designed to be a resource for those diverse communities. So the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce, there is a Chamber of Commerce for those with disabilities, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, the Veterans Chamber, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber, the National Asian Pacific Islander American Chamber of Commerce. All of these organizations operate at a national level. They have offices in Washington. They work closely with the U.S. Department of Commerce. They work closely amongst each other. I know for quite some time, NGLCC and the U.S. Hispanic Chamber have done some collaborative work in terms of certifications for members. But these particular organizations can be go-to, and then there are their local affiliates that you can be a part of. So things that you may need clarification on, if lists are going to change, if there are state efforts that you need to know about, the participation and the engagement by diverse businesses with their local chamber of commerce can be a great way to stay up to date and not lose any opportunities. So it's been a lot that we've covered. I did want to point out, though, that technology will continue to impact us as it relates to supplier diversity. And, outside of all of the issues that we've probably been facing with the change of administration, we probably would be putting a greater emphasis around some of the technological advances associated with it. I mean, the good thing about some of the advances of technology that it does make it easier for small minority businesses to do things that they couldn't do before. They can do proposals a whole lot faster. They are able to do back office administration. They can do financing. So the idea of technology and how it is advancing in terms of its support of all kinds of businesses, but certainly diverse businesses, can be a shining light that helps to allow you to stay very much engaged in opportunity. I think it's important to be mindful that the regulations are something that we're just going to have to monitor. A lot of what's happened on the federal level, we know will continue to work its way out, but we also want to be very close and looking at what's happening on our state level. In some cases, the states may make it feasible for us to still do things locally that we haven't thought about before, that may replace some of the opportunities that we had pursued with the federal level. And then issues around sustainability have once again, showed its potential as a priority, and it opens up new opportunities around innovation for diverse businesses. So looking at that, so there are some future trends, there are some opportunities that are coming out of this, but we are without any doubt in a whole new world and facing some unique challenges. So I wanted to leave some time to respond to some questions because there's a whole lot that I've talked about. So I want to thank you, let you know that, it is about being strategic in our approach and how we look at the use of things like supplier diversity to benefit the organizations, and that any way that we can implement best practices will allow for us in order to be even that much more effective in what we do. And then that's my QR code and some fun graphics that we created. But I wanted to stop sharing for a little bit and spend a few minutes to respond to some questions that you might have putting together this content. These slides will be available for everyone as well, but I went through quite a bit, so I'd love to answer some questions if you have some.
Greg, I have a question.
Okay.
My question is, as long as you've been in this industry of the supplier diverse, have you ever been through such a challenging time as what we're having right now? And how do you see the future of it? If we have to go through this within the next, obviously, in the next 3 years, what kind of game plans should we set up to try and get past this, to get through this?
Mhm. So I would start by saying, and as I was putting together this, I mean, really this all started like around the 1970s, 1980s. So, the amount of time that may have been necessary to really codify things in a way that would have, provided us greater longevity and stability in it, just wasn't there. And we were quite vulnerable as a result of it because maybe there was stuff that we should have done. But the short answer is we were never aware of how intentional. I think that there were a lot of advances. I remember as President Biden signed all of those executive orders, I thought this is fantastic. This will be, terrific for businesses. But that wasn't until 2021. So I think where we are today is that we have to revisit where we were and where we want to be, but we also have to be smart and figure out exactly where are we, which is why I think it's always good to read through the executive orders and understand like exactly what do they say, what are my limits, what's my engagement with the federal government and what's my engagement with my local government, and what are the new opportunities that I can develop. But I will say that it's never been as blatant as it is today. And to that degree, I think we have to approach it with a lot more than a headline or, a doom scroll swipe. Yes.
My question is really about, I've seen a lot of, you mentioned meritocracy. Somebody wrote an article and it said something about MEI is the new DEI.
Mhm,
And at first I thought it was going to be a critical piece, but it wasn't.
mhm,
So, immediately I was like, okay. But and that list that you showed with all the words that can't be used, I've seen that before because and I always say this non-compliance compliance is absolutely killing me
mhm,
because I've had to reword, resubmit, get approved, and then the lawyers go through, nope, you can't say it. So I think there was one where it was a resource about explaining intersectionality
mhm.
with Kimberly Crenshaw's, you know, uh, her TED talk. And I was told, mm-mm. Now, how does one talk about intersectionality without including the woman who coined the phrase? So, it's every step of the way fighting, the little pieces of it.
Mhm.
But I was told it was the EEOC that, is really, I guess, in the private sector, really making recommendations, and that's what we have to comply to. So I don't know.
Well,
Does
you
that
bring
list get longer? Or?
so the list will definitely get longer. Actually, that there was a report that came out from EEOC that said that they're monitoring the words that we're using. So we say green, and then they'll say, so we'll add green. We say blue, then they'll add blue. So that list will just continue to evolve. I mean, like I said, it was originally 150 when it first came out. Now it's well over 300. I do also think this idea of merit based, there are a lot of inequities in terms of how people kind of get to that, like, the opportunities to competitively fight for a piece of business. Well, there's things that are privileged that will allow someone else to have a leg up, even if you are saying that it's merit, it's really not because of the things that what I had in order to get here, what they did. And some of it is just relationships. I'm not in that country club, I go to church on Sunday. I don't go and take off on Sunday. I don't know, but I think that, the issue is the inequity that's associated with that. But that's really the intent, unfortunately, that's associated with it. So, one other, point that I would certainly bring as we kind of draw to a close our conversation today is that, as professionals in this particular space, and that's, something that I've given a lot of thought to, is how do we evolve our way of looking at this particular work? How do we, conceptualize what 2.0, 5.0, 3.0, whatever it is, to another level? I think that through the civil rights movement to where we are today, there's just been so many interpretations and evolution of how we are able to create more inclusive and belonging and welcoming spaces. And that's the language you use today, but there was even more intentional language that was used in previous years. And I think we may have to be much more mindful of how we evolve the concept of it, especially living in the environment that we're living in. I would say in a year from now, a lot of the things that were normal for us are definitely going to be different. And if we're going to continue to do this kind of work, we're going to have to think a step ahead Often it feels like in this space we're playing whack-a-mole, like we come up with this and it gets whacked, and we come up and we go with that. And for many of us who were in this space, I think during the 2021, 22, 23, there was a lot of evolving thought about this, and theories that were being introduced, and concepts that were building upon others. And I think that's a big part of where we need to be today, is how can we take the great work that we've done and evolve it in an environment that perhaps is not as welcoming and inclusive as it was when we began, but yet still with the intent to try and make a difference in society. So, but well, if there are no other questions, one of the things that I've always been told, the best gift you can give any audience is time back. So we're about 9 or 10 minutes early, and it was my pleasure to produce this presentation. I will be sure to share it with the folks at IDC so all of you can get it. Read your executive orders as often as you possibly can. And I'd like to thank you all once again for joining us today.
Great. Always good to talk to you. Thank
All right.
you.
Good day, everybody.
All righty. Bye now.
Okay.
Great presentation. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.